So if you're involved in delivering a massive project, a skyscraper, maybe a new power plant, some huge infrastructure network, the only certainty is, well, uncertainty.
The scope will change. It's inevitable.
Absolutely. And when you're dealing with contracts that run into the hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars, you just can't handle those deviations with a simple verbal agreement.
No, you need a rule book,
Right.
a constitutional rule book, you might say, for managing change.
And for these huge international design build projects, that rule book is very often the FIDI Yellow Book.
Exactly. And the central nervous system for all of that change management is Clause 13, variations and adjustments.
So in this deep dive, we're taking that highly specialized, incredibly dense language from the 2017 edition and trying to give you, our listener, a kind of strategic shortcut.
That's the mission. We're going to break down the process. Who can command a change? When can a contractor legally push back? And most importantly, how is the money calculated?
Right, whether you're adding new work or, crucially, taking existing work away.
It's all about the mechanics. This clause is a blueprint for risk allocation. We want to show you the levers that keep these mega projects on track, even when the scope shifts.
Okay, so let's unpack this crucial machinery. Where do we begin?
We have to start with the foundation of power in subclause 13.1.
The right to vary.
Exactly. The engineer, who acts for the employer, has the main authority to instruct a variation.
And they can do that pretty much any time before the taking over certificate is issued.
That's right. The simple read is, the engineer commands, the contractor performs. But it's not quite that simple.
There's a catch.
There's an immediate and very important check on that power. It's a specific restriction.
Okay.
The engineer cannot instruct a variation just to omit work from the contractor's scope.
Only to then give that same work to the employer or someone else to do.
Precisely.
Now, that is a huge strategic insight. Why is that specific rule so vital?
Well, think about it. It's there to protect the contractor's entire commercial position. If the engineer could just unilaterally strip out all the profitable work and give it to a buddy, the whole contract would just fall apart.
So it ensures that variations are for genuine project needs, not just to reallocate the good bits of the job.
Exactly. It protects the integrity of the original deal.
Okay, so the engineer has power, but with limits. But this is where it gets interesting because the contractor also has teeth.
They do. And this might be the most surprising part of the clause.
While they're generally bound to proceed with an instruction, they have this contractual shield.
The right to give notice and reject the instruction.
But only if it falls into one of 5 very specific categories. These are the contractor's 5 outs.
And they're not minor complaints. These are the 5 grounds that basically prove the change is so fundamental, it compromises the risk the contractor agreed to take on in the first place.
Okay, so let's walk through them. What's the first one?
First, they can reject it if the varied work was, and this is the key word, unforeseeable.
Unforeseeable, right. So completely out of left field given the original scope and the employer's requirement.
Exactly. The second one is very practical.
Which is?
The contractor simply cannot readily obtain the required goods for the variation.
That makes sense. Supply chain reality. You can't be ordered to build something with materials that don't exist or can't be sourced in time.
Right. Then the third one is about risk.
Health and safety.
Yes. If the instruction adversely affects their obligations for health and safety, or for protecting the environment, no one can be forced to do something unsafe.
Absolutely not. Okay, that's 3. What about the last 2?
The final 2 are tied directly to the project's performance promise.
So the guarantees.
The fourth is if the change will have an adverse impact on the scheduled performance guarantees. The contractor promised a certain outcome, a certain level of efficiency or output.
And if the variation makes that impossible, they can reject it.
And the fifth is very similar. It's if the change might adversely affect their fitness for purpose obligation.
Their core guarantee. If the change compromises the final product, they have grounds to say no.
And when the contractor does that, when they invoke one of those 5 points, the ball is immediately back in the engineer's court.
And the engineer has to respond promptly.
They have to. They have to give notice to either cancel, confirm, or change the instruction. It forces a very rapid, very formal review of the impact.
So that covers the engineer's power and the contractor's defense. Let's flip the script now. What about changes the contractor wants to make?
That brings us to value engineering. Subclause 13.2.
This is the mechanism for the contractor to propose changes that are actually beneficial, right?
It's the formal process for innovation.
Yeah.
Contractors on the ground, they might see a better, cheaper, or faster way to do something.
But the proposal itself has to be prepared at the contractor's cost. They're paying for their own pitch.
They are. And that pitch has to aim for one of 4 concrete benefits for the employer.
Okay, what are they?
It has to either accelerate completion, reduce the employer's cost, whether that's in execution, maintenance, or operation.
Improve efficiency or value, or just otherwise benefit the employer.
And once it's submitted, it has all the details, description, program changes, cost adjustments. But here's the big contractual reality check.
The catch.
The engineer's consent to the proposal is, and I quote, at the sole discretion of the employer.
Wait a second. So I'm the contractor. I've just spent weeks of my team's time and money developing a brilliant proposal that I know will save the employer a fortune. And they can just say no thanks for no reason at all. Doesn't that just kill any incentive to innovate?
That is the exact tension this clause creates. It's set up for collaboration, but the ultimate power stays firmly with the employer. They have zero risk and full control.
So the contractor's basically betting that their idea is just so good, the benefit's so obvious, that the employer can't afford to say no.
It's a high-stakes commercial gamble.
So what happens if they win that gamble and the employer accepts? What about the savings?
Well, the engineer instructs the variation and then considers how that benefit is shared. But, and this is critical, only if a sharing arrangement is already written into the particular conditions of the contract.
Ah, so it's not an automatic 50-50 split. It has to be pre-agreed.
It has to be pre-negotiated. If it's not defined in there, the contractor might just get paid for the work and not see a penny of the savings they generated.
Wow. And I see a key procedural note here. The contractor can't slow down any other work while they're waiting for a decision on their proposal.
The train keeps moving. Absolutely. No work stoppage.
Okay, so we've covered the who can initiate a change. But the really big question is, how does the contractual calculator actually work? Let's get into the pricing.
Right. Subclause 13.3. This sets out the 2 paths for initiating a variation.
Variation by instruction and variation by request for proposal.
Correct. The first one, 13.3.1, is when the engineer just says, do it, and the pricing follows. The second is where the engineer asks for the price before they give the final order.
Let's stick with the most common one, the direct instruction. A critical clock starts ticking then, right?
It does. The contractor has to proceed with the work, and then they have 28 days to submit their detailed particulars.
The full package description, program changes, and the cost proposal.
All within 28 days. Unless they agree to a different period, it forces swift documentation.
Now, variations often involve taking work away, omissions, and the formula for that has a really specific protection for the contractor.
It does, and it's often missed. The contractor can include costs they've already incurred for that work, even though it's now been canceled.
So they don't get penalized for prep work on something that suddenly disappears.
Exactly. But the financial protection goes even deeper, especially when work is omitted and then reassigned.
You're talking about loss of profit.
I am. If the omitted work was going to be done by, say, a subcontractor, the contractor's proposal can include amounts for loss of profit and other damages they suffer because of that omission.
That is a massive safeguard. It protects their earnings on their whole supply chain.
It's a huge part of their commercial protection.
Okay, let's talk valuation, the pricing. How does FIDC ensure a fair price for new work?
It creates a really clear hierarchy, a kind of 3-step ladder for pricing.
Step 1.
Step 1 is the simplest. You use the rates and prices that are already in the contract schedule for that item or for very similar work.
Clean and easy. But what if the work is sort of similar, but the conditions are completely different?
That's step 2. If the rates in the schedule aren't appropriate, maybe the variation means working in a tiny, confined space or in extreme weather, then a new rate is derived.
Derived.
You take the relevant schedule rates as your starting point, and then you make reasonable adjustments for the new, different circumstances.
And the final step? What if the change is just completely new, something nobody ever thought of during the bid?
That's step 3, the final safety net. If no rates are relevant at all, the valuation defaults to cost plus profit.
So the contractor gets their actual costs covered, plus an agreed profit margin.
Yes. It ensures they're compensated fairly for something truly unforeseen. It really shows the contract values fairness over pure rigidity.
And because these negotiations can take time, the engineer doesn't just stop payments.
No, they assess a provisional rate or price for the interim payments It's like a temporary IOU to keep the contractor's cash flow moving while the final price gets sorted out.
Okay, and just to round out these internal financial tools, let's touch on the known unknowns.
Provisional sums and day work.
Provisional sums under 13.4. These are basically placeholders for costs that the engineer will instruct later.
Right. That's a good way to put it. For specialized work that isn't fully defined up front. And the total paid is the actual cost of the purchase, plus a percentage for overhead and profit that's defined in the contract.
And day work.
Day work is for minor incidental work where setting a rate is just impractical. It's valued based on a day work schedule, if there is one. The big thing here for the contractor is documentation.
Daily statements of all the resources used.
In duplicate, plus an electronic copy. And those day work rates are generally all-inclusive. They're deemed to cover taxes, overheads, and profit.
Okay, so that covers changes that are internal to the project. Let's shift gears to the big external risks.
Macro risks.
Starting with Clause 13.6, adjustments for changes in laws.
This is how the contract handles the regulatory landscape shifting under your feet. The contract price adjusts for cost changes that result from changes in the law.
New statutes, repeals, even just a new official government interpretation of an old law.
All of it.
What's the cutoff point for this? When does the risk transfer?
The change has to have happened after the base date of the contract. The base date is the snapshot of the world the contractor bid into. Any legal change after that point is grounds for adjustment.
And the compensation. It flows both ways.
Correct. If the contractor's costs go up or they're delayed, they're entitled to an extension of time and/or payment. But if a change in law actually decreases their costs, say a tax gets removed, the employer gets a reduction in the contract price.
It keeps the original risk allocation stable.
That's the goal.
Okay, finally, let's talk inflation and volatility. Subclause 13.7, adjustments for changes in cost.
Essential for any long-term project. If you have indexation schedules in the contract, prices are adjusted for rises or falls in things like labor, goods, fuel.
It's usually a pretty standard formula using published cost indices.
It is, but the clause includes a very critical financial incentive, a way to keep the contractor focused on finishing on time.
The stick, not the carrot.
Precisely. If the contractor fails to complete the works within the time for completion, any price adjustment after that date uses the index or price that is more favorable to the employer.
So let's say the price of steel skyrockets after the project was supposed to be finished.
The contractor is penalized. They have to use the old lower index from before the completion date, unless for some strange reason the current index is even lower.
So it transfers the risk of that post-schedule inflation directly onto the party that's responsible for the delay.
It's a very powerful tool to keep the project on program. And it's worth noting, these adjustments don't apply to work that was priced on a cost-plus basis.
So after all this, what's the big picture takeaway for someone navigating these huge projects?
Well, the deeper you go into Clause 13, the clearer it is that this isn't just paperwork. It is a highly refined, sometimes adversarial, risk management tool.
It gives the engineer huge authority, but it balances that with clear boundaries and very structured financial recourse for the contractor.
And the entire point is to replace uncertainty with predictability. Whether it's the right to reject an unsafe instruction, the fallback to cost plus profit for new work, or protection from a change in law, the framework defines the entitlements.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought, building on that inflation discussion.
Right. We just talked about 13.7, which uses indices to handle cost changes.
But the contract also says that if full compensation for cost changes is not covered by those index clauses, the accepted contract amount is deemed to have already included amounts to cover that contingency.
And that provision raises a really important strategic question for you, the listener.
Okay.
When a global event, a pandemic, a major war, causes an unprecedented, unforeseeable spike in a material cost that just blows past what the index formula covers, how much of that unexpected, uncompensated risk is a contractor legally expected to just swallow?
Under that deemed to have included contingency.
It's the ultimate test of risk allocation. Something to think about until our next deep dive.